Hello, I am Liana Lupas. I'm the librarian, the curator of the scripture collection for the American Bible Society. I'm going to share with you some of my favorite books. I'm going to show them and say a few words about them and hope that you will like them as much as I do. Thank you. This is one of my favorite books. I like them all collectively, each one individually. This is one of the very nicest that I have. It is an edition of the Gothic translation of the Gospels. And it has the Gothic text, the Swedish text, the Icelandic text, and the Latin text. The Goths were the first Germanic tribe to adopt Christianity, and also the first one to have a Bible in their own language. The person who brought Christianity to the Goths and who did the Bible translation was Bishop Wulfilas, who died in 382. And that's actually the time when St. Jerome was commissioned to start the Latin translation that is today known as the Vulgate. So the Gothic translation and the Latin translation are more or less contemporary, which means that the Gothic translation is one of the earliest translations of the Bible ever done. So it's also an important source to compare with the Greek text. The Gothic translation was preserved in manuscript form, and to this day we have about 8 manuscripts that have survived. None of them is complete. Put together, they preserve fragments from the Old Testament, significant portions of the 4 Gospels, and fragments from the Pauline epistles. There is no complete text of the Bible in Gothic that had reached us. That's what we have. The Gothic manuscripts date to the 5th and 6th century of the Christian era, of course. The best of them and the most famous and the most spectacular is the one known as the Codex Argenteus, the Silver Codex. It's a really amazing manuscript. It was copied on leaves of parchment dyed in purple. And it was written in silver ink with gold initials. This was no ordinary manuscript. It is assumed that it must have belonged to the greatest king of the Goths, Theodoric. Nothing is known of what happened to this manuscript until well into the 16th century, when the manuscript was the possession of the Habsburg Emperor Rudolf II. He's the one that moved the Habsburg capital from Vienna to Prague. And when he did that, in the 1550s, he took the manuscript, the Codex Argenteus, and moved it to Prague. So that's the first thing we really know about the manuscript, that it was in Prague at this moment. About 100 years later, in the last years of the 30 Years' War in Europe, Prague was conquered by the Swedes. The Swedish army looted Prague, and they took the manuscript and brought it to Sweden, where it became the property of the Queen of Sweden, Christina. Christina titled herself in Latin as Queen of the Swedes, the Goths, and the Vandals. So the Swedes strongly believed that they were descendants of the Goths. They were very attached to this theory, and the Codex Argenteus became a national treasure for them. Unfortunately for Christina, she decided to become a Catholic. Sweden was a Lutheran church, it still is. So the Swedish aristocracy wouldn't go with Christina's idea. Christina had to abdicate. And all of a sudden, from being the queen, she became sort of a pauper. She took the manuscript and she presented the manuscript to her friend and librarian, a man named Vossius, Isaac Vossius, as was his Latin name. And Vossius took the manuscript out of Sweden into the Netherlands, into Holland. When he took it in Holland, he let one of his relatives, who was a very learned young man, a man called Franciscus Junius the Younger. So Junius copied the manuscript, transcribed the manuscript, and had it published, the text, the Gothic text. And that was the first time a Gothic text was known as a printed book. Christina's former chancellor, Count Magnus de la Gardie, came to the Netherlands and purchased back the manuscript because it was a national treasure. He brought it back to Sweden and ordered a superb silver cover to be made for it. And finally he gave the manuscript to the University of Uppsala, where it still resides today. With the manuscript back in Sweden, a Swedish scholar decided to produce a Swedish edition of the manuscript, and this is it. It was printed, it was the first Swedish edition of the text. It was printed in 1571 in Sweden. And it had, I'm going to show you now the title page. Bear with me. So this is the title page, and it states that this is the name of the editor, Stiernhielm. Stiernhielm, the editor, added a very long and learned preface to this edition that talks about the origin of languages. And toward the end of this preface, he talks about how languages evolved from a previous one. And the classic example of that is Latin with the Romance languages. And what he does here is he prints the text of the Lord's Prayer in Latin and in 7 Romance languages, starting with Italian and ending here with what he calls Valahica. Valahica is Romanian. For me, that's very significant because I am Romanian. I was born in Romania, educated in Romania. And what I want to show here is the first Romanian text to reach outside Romania, to reach the rest of Europe. This was the calling card of the Romanian language in the rest of Europe. Going back to the book itself, in addition to the title page that we've seen, the book has a frontispiece that is an engraving of the image of the silver cover of the manuscript that Magnus de la Gardie donated to the University of Uppsala. And it has the story of Magnus' great deed of restoring this manuscript to his country. What you see here is an inscription naming him as the restorer of the manuscript. What you see here are two angels holding a banner that just mentions Isaiah 40. Isaiah 40 is the chapter that begins with "Comfort ye, my people." Incidentally, these are the first words in Handel's Messiah, the tenor aria. You don't want me to sing it. What we see next are two angels that draw a curtain to reveal here Bishop Ulfila copying the manuscript. The scene here shows an allegorical figure of Time, that's Father Time, lifting the gravestone so that the Codex Argenteus here can be brought back to light. And the figure that brings back the Codex Argenteus is a representation of truth. And she's really the naked truth. That's about it.